Hello. Let's start by saying that any new viewers, please watch the first episode as this lesson continues where the last ended. In the last lesson, we created our root folder containing all the folders that we will require for the building of our website. First thing we're going to do for this lesson is create our CSS file by double-clicking the empty area at the top of our text editor, then saving it in the CSS folder within our root folder as style.css. Repeat. Open a new file in your text editor. Save it in your CSS folder as style.css. Now let's go to our index sheet and link it to our style sheet by placing a self-closing link element inside of the head element directly under the title element. Again, we're going to put a self-closing link element directly under your title element, which is within your head element. And that will link your index sheet to your style sheet. Once again, we're going to link your index sheet to your style sheet by placing a link element inside of your head element directly under your title element. When creating your link element, you will also include the attributes rel, that's R-E-L, with the equal sign and parentheses. The attributes value, which in this case is style sheet. You will also include the attribute type equal parentheses with its value of text /CSS parentheses. And finally, the attribute href equal sign parentheses with its value CSS /style .css parentheses. And then of course, your closing angle bracket. Once again, in your link element, you want to include the attributes rel with a value of style sheet, the attribute type with the value of text /style CSS, and the attribute href with the value of CSS/style style.css. This actually represents the location of the CSS file of the style CSS file, which is inside of the folder CSS. Now that we've created and linked a style sheet to our HTML file, we will experiment with its practical use. Let's take our text in our body element and encase it in an H1 element, which is the largest of the heading elements. Heading elements range from H1 to H6 and differs in font size largest to smallest. Again, we're going to take our text that's in our body element, hello world, and we want to encase it in the largest of the heading elements, which is H1. Again, we're taking our text within our body element, hello world, and we're encasing it in the largest of the heading elements, H1. Now, let's parent our H1 element by encasing it into a div element, giving our heading separation in our web page. Again, we want to take our H1 element and encase it within the parent element div or div, which will give it separation within our website. Once again, we're taking our H1 element with our text hello world, and we're encasing it in a div element, which will give it separation within our website. Well, let's go back and change it up. Inside of our body element, we want to encase my first website within an H1 element. Now let's encase our H1 element inside of a div element as such. Now let's move to our style sheet and give our heading some style. Click on to our style sheet, stylesheet.css. First, we want to create a body element by typing body, which is the selector. Then curly brackets. Then the attribute background color with a value of red, our declaration, within the curly brackets. The selector selects the HTML element and the declaration gives a set of instructions and its value. Once again, inside of our style sheet CSS, we want to create a selector body, then curly brackets, then the attribute background color, colon, with a value of red, semicolon, and the closing curly brackets. Sorry. The selector selects the HTML element. And the declaration gives a set of instructions and its value. Declaration, a set of instructions, and a value. Next, we want to give our div element instructions. A website generally has several div elements, so to begin with, we want to give this particular div element its own ID attribute. In the CSS style sheet, we want to create an ID attribute, and it must begin with a pound symbol. CSS style sheet, we want to create an ID attribute which begins with the pound symbol, and name it whatever you desire to name it. And I'm going to name this one Title 1. Now we want to go back to our index sheet, and inside of our divs opening tag, we want to encase our new ID attribute value Title 1. Inside of our index sheet .html, we want to give our div element an attribute, an ID attribute, equals parentheses with a value of Title 1 parentheses closing angle bracket, which will basically identify the ID bracket, the ID attribute, or the ID element, which is in the .css file. Once again, since I may have sound confusing, inside of your style sheet, the ID element Title 1 will actually identify with the div element with a ID attribute Title 1. Once again, inside of your CSS file, CSS style sheet, CSS file, CSS style sheet, you want to create an ID element. I'm naming my ID element Title 1. Pound symbol Title 1. Then we want to go to the HTML sheet, or the index sheet, or index.html sheet, and we want to give our div element an ID attribute with a value of Title 1 that is represented by the CSS sheet's ID element Title 1. Now we want to go back to the style sheet and give our ID element a color attribute with a value of white. Again, we want to go back to our style sheet.css and give our ID element a color attribute with a value of white. Now let's save, refresh, and review. Note that you will have to save both your style sheet and your index sheet before it will actually change it on the wide web. After reviewing the changes that we've made, I've realized that I didn't include one thing. If you notice that the background did not change color at all, it is because whenever you include styling to your body or your div or any separation on the site, you have to include a width at minimum, but sometimes it's best to include a width and a height, especially if it's just an empty box, or you won't notice any changes. That's one thing we have to correct. And then the other is back on the index sheet, the backslash in the link has to be removed. File, save, file sheet, enter width, colon, 100%, semicolon, enter, height, colon, 100%, semicolon, file, save, and review. Bingo. This concludes episode 2 of this basic HTML and CSS series. Please like and continue in order with the next episode. Please also take the time to let the sponsor's message that precedes these lessons play out in its entirety. It takes less than a minute and truly helps us to cover a little of the expense that it costs us to provide these coding lessons. As always, thank you for watching, and don't forget to subscribe.